My name is Jerry Martins, and I'm pleased to be bringing you a series of podcasts from the Central Washington Sentinel. The Sentinel is an online publication that was put together here in Kittitas County to bring pertinent information and articles to you about items and issues that are important to our citizens of this county. You can view the Sentinel at centralwashingtonsentinel.com. In this particular podcast, we're going to be interviewing Jerry Pettit, our Kittitas County Auditor. He will be, in this particular podcast, we're going to be talking strictly about the elections that have taken place. Jerry is in charge of the elections throughout the county, so he's the perfect person to highlight the good and the bad of the elections. There's a lot of concern and questions about our elections, both locally and clear up into the national level. So at this point, hopefully we can bring forth instructive and informational podcasts to you, the citizens, so that you feel more comfortable about what is taking place with our election process. At this point, I'd like to introduce Jerry Pettit, the Kittitas County Auditor, and he's in charge of our elections and things. So Jerry, let us know what your office does.
So our office is not only in charge of elections that we run for our county and all of our local jurisdictions, but also for the state and the federal level as well. But there's other things that the auditor's office does as well. We are in charge of all of the compiling and budget reporting. We're in charge of all of the financial reporting. We pay all the bills that the county has. We do all the payroll for the county. But we also write all the checks for all of our local jurisdictions as well. All the fire districts, all of the water districts, the sewer districts, the cemetery districts, all of those things. So that's basically our budget and accounting office. But we also do licensing. So that's licensing and titling through an agent agreement that we have with the Department of Licensing. That all of the county auditors throughout the state do that as well. So we're in charge of that, and we have two sub-agents that are within the county as well, one here in Cle Elum and one in Ellensburg, and we're in charge of monitoring, working with them. They are under contract with us. So that's our licensing and titling division. And we also do recording. Now recording is an interesting part because any transaction that has to do with land comes through our office. Whether it's a subdivision or a survey or a purchase and sale of property or a refinance, any of those kinds of things come through our office. Liens recorded on property. Mining claims, those are also recorded and filed with our office. So those are the kind of things that we do. There's 4 different divisions. There's elections, budget and accounting, recording, and licensing.
So in essence, you are the budgeting entity for our fire departments, anything within the county, cemetery commissions, anything that falls under a commission heading. You're actually the budgetary arm of that, correct?
So not really.
Okay.
Each of those boards are elected independently, and they have their own set of laws that they follow. They do their own budgets. They actually approve the payment of their own bills. The only thing we really do is just write the check.
Write the check, okay.
So they approve the bills, they send it to us, we write the check, and then the treasurer's office holds all the money for all of those districts. So once the check's written, and then the treasurer's office redeems those checks as they come through the bank. Treasurer's office holds their money. We pay their bills. We write the checks.
Okay, sounds good. Well, in this particular podcast, we're going to be focusing on elections. There's been a lot of questions raised over the past couple of years about elections. So I reached out to Jerry and asked him if he would sit down and work with us towards educating our populace about how elections are conducted. So our first questions are registrations. Explain how our county handles voter registrations.
So voter registration is always a bone of contention, or people always ask questions about the rules regarding voter registration. Voter registration in the state of Washington is really pretty open. So as long as a person can identify where their abode is, where their primary residence is, and then they fill out a voter registration, and then they are attesting to that. So they provide us with either the last 4 digits of their social security number or their driver's license or identification number on that voter registration. And that provides for a certain level of verification as we go through the process. That's how we do that. Now, they have to attest. They're signing a declaration, which actually that signature and that declaration can provide them with opportunities to be, if they violate the law, then that's a felony. Once they are, if in fact they are found guilty of that through courts. The other thing is, as we verify that, we verify eligibility from several different ways. The Secretary of State's office runs a report on death records with the State Department of Health periodically throughout the year. So anything that comes through on that shows that we may have a person who has died that is still a registered voter, that report comes to each of the counties for us to do the verification of that. Now, just because that's coming through doesn't mean we automatically do that. We need to verify it. So we go through a verification process through a couple of different ways. But one of the things we track all the time, and one of the reasons we take the different newspapers within the county, is we are able then to track death notices and obituaries. So anytime we see one of those come through the newspaper, then that is one of the methods by which we monitor our voter registration records, and we see those, then they're canceled. Many people talk about people who have felony convictions. The rules surrounding that are, if you are incarcerated, then you cannot vote. So the state also runs verification of people who are incarcerated under felony convictions periodically throughout the year as well. And if people pop up on those that are registered voters, then that also is a process where we verify that with that person. So we're sending that out, those cards out and that information to those individuals for verification of those things, as well as verifying with the courts. So there's multiple ways of doing that. Then there's an organization or a process that's called ERIC. That is a national voter registration database check that not all states are a member of, but well over half of them are a member of. So we are able to verify voter registrations interstate through that system. And if we get reports back from that, which is run a few times throughout the year as well, then we also do a verification internally within each county with those people to ensure that they haven't voted in 2 different states, for instance. If they have, then we have a process whereby we start the charging. All of that then is popped up to the prosecutor's office, who then potentially work with prosecutors in other states to determine how that's going to work. Usually what we find when that occurs is they've forgotten to cancel their registration in our state, and they've moved and registered to vote and they haven't voted, or the other way around. But once in a while we find one of those. And that can be potentially a federal conviction. So if the state doesn't, if our prosecutors don't go or our AG's office don't go, then usually what will occur is the Secretary of State's office will forward that to the federal authorities, and then they start that process. So we have processed the way that works. The other thing is people who move. So currently, all counties within the state of Washington forward ballots. Now we track that forwarding as well. And so what happens is if someone's moved, and of course they provided a forwarding address, and that ballot is forwarded. And usually what happens is the voter goes, well, wait a minute, I don't belong in that jurisdiction anymore.
Why did I get this?
So they update their voter registration, and then they get a ballot from the proper county which is great. And then what happens is through our current voter registration system, the ballot that we send them is canceled, and the new ballot that's issued becomes their primary ballot. And because of our statewide voter registration system, we are able to track how all of that works. So that helps us through a reconciliation process as we move through the election.
In your reconciliation, is that by the precinct level? How does that actually, I know you've got a certain number of ballots that are sent out and it's reconciled against a number, I'm sure, and I'm assuming that it's at the precinct level.
Yes, as well as additional levels.
Okay.
So we have 59 precincts in our county. So the voter registration has to be reconciled by precinct, but we also have to have the knowledge of voters registered in each district, each city, and the county as a whole. So our voter registration in our elections process with our ballots are reconciled at all of those levels as we move through the process.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, we'll pause for a moment and move on to our second question.
Sounds good.
So our next question is going to be vetting of candidates for eligibility of candidacy in today's world. How do we approach that?
So that's a good question. What's interesting is the thing that I tell most people when they come in and talk with me about candidates for public office is there are no minimum qualifications for elected officials, except prosecuting attorney and judges, and of course the attorney general. Otherwise, there are no minimum qualifications, and their minimum qualifications are only that they are a member of the bar. So you have to be very clear about this, so when voters do research and educate themselves about candidates, one of the things that should be very important is identifying their qualifications and whether or not they have the qualifications for the position in which they are running. Now, our requirement is to follow the state constitution and the statutes. Both the state constitution and statutes have specific requirements for residency. There is a 30-day requirement, a 1-year requirement. Sometimes it's just that they've just moved there. But you have to read the Constitution and then read the statutes, the state laws for requirement. And then different jurisdictions have different requirements. So for instance, in the city of Ellensburg, in order to take office, at the time you take office, you have to have lived in the city limits for a year. Now you can file for the position in May and not have lived there for a year. You just have to fulfill the requirements that you have lived there a year at the time you take office.
Which would be January 1st.
Which would be January.
Yes.
So there are different requirements for different jurisdictions, and one of the things that we do is look at that when a person comes in to file as a candidate for a specific position. And sometimes when we look at that, they are not registered to vote in that particular jurisdiction in which they choose to file as a candidate. And there are times where that person goes, oh, well, I need to update my voter registration because I've lived there and I haven't updated it, so I need to update it. So they'll update their voter registration and then immediately file for candidacy for a position within that jurisdiction. We always ask questions when that occurs so that the candidate specifically understands the requirements and the issues surrounding that candidacy as they move forward. If the auditor then continues to have concerns, then the voter registration piece, then we push to the canvassing board and prosecuting attorney. But the first thing that has to happen is the auditor needs to talk with that registered voter to assure that they understand what the issues and qualifications are. And that usually happens, again, at the time that they file for the candidacy. So it's really interesting how we vet that and how we make sure. The other piece of that is some jurisdictions have districts or council areas in which a person has to live in prior to filing for a council position or a school district position, or for that matter. Prior to filing, okay, we verify that candidate lives within that particular director district or council district within the the particular entity at which they're filing for candidate. And we do our job as much as we can to try to ensure that the candidates are that that's appropriate. And I would say probably a very large amount of time, people are really working really hard to make sure that that's the case. And sometimes someone will ask a question, well, I live in this particular school district, for instance, but my kids go to a different school district, and I have a place that actually I could live in that district, so I'll change my voter registration to that, and that way I can run for the position. I go, well, that's okay. As long as you're going to sign the declaration on your voter registration that you actually live there. Now, be aware that if you're going to do that, then the voting public then is going to be very close attention to what you're doing, and that may not be something, a road you want to go down. Because the other piece of that is any registered voter within your jurisdiction or within the county can mount what's called a voter registration challenge. And that challenge, depending upon timing, comes to the county auditor or the canvassing board. And it is the challenger's responsibility to follow the voter registration challenge laws, and is the challenger's ultimate responsibility to prove that that person actually does not live where they've registered to vote. I've been through several of those. They're interesting. Some challenges have been upheld, some not. But it's an interesting process to look at. And if you're interested in what those rules are, hey, statutes, 29A is election law, and they have all of those in there to look at, and it's an interesting process.
Okay. Well, I think you covered most of that at this point. Other than the qualifications, going back to that, just judges and the prosecuting attorney are the only ones that have a requirement other than residency for a background that could satisfy their position.
Correct. So one of the other things that I wanted to talk a little bit about is how do we work with each of the candidates? It's our job to help them within the rules and the requirements that we have. We provide voter registration information for voters within jurisdictions in which candidates are applying. There are many times people will come and talk with us about what does that position do? What are the responsibilities? What does this district do? What are some of the rules regarding filing? Most districts and most candidates have rules under the Public Disclosure Commission. And one of the things that I always talk to people about is make sure you're doing that, because that can become a campaign issue if you're not following those rules.
Yes.
And there are people who don't file with the PDC, and that can become a campaign issue, because when you don't follow those rules, then it becomes a question as if you become elected to a position within a jurisdiction, are you going to follow the rules under the statutes for that particular entity? So that's a really interesting process to think about.
Sounds good. Okay, we'll move on to our third question. We're returning now with Jerry Pettit. We're going through a series of questions about elections. In this particular question, we'll be asking about the release and the control of our voter ballots. How is that actually overseen?
Well, there's a lot to that.
I figured there would be.
So what I want to talk about is the process and the order in which this occurs. So as we get to election time, we send a ballot automatically to every registered voter within the jurisdiction that has either a candidate or an issue on the ballot. And the general election, what you'll find is that's everybody in the county. In a primary election, that's not necessarily the case. And particularly in an odd year, which are mostly, if not all, nonpartisan positions, there has to be more than two people file as a candidate in order for that position to be on a primary ballot. Now, we have a few of those in our county this year. If only 2 people file, then it goes directly to the general election and we don't have a primary in that area. So there are some years we don't even have a primary election within our county. This year we have several, and a couple of them are surprising. Once the ballots are mailed to everyone, as they receive their ballots, then there's 2 ways to return the ballots. The first one is through the mail, and the second one is through the multiple ballot drop boxes that we have throughout the county. Yeah, and I believe both of those are very secure. People have concerns with the mail. We've never really had a problem with the Postal Service. But if you have concerns about a signature on the outside of an envelope, first of all, the Postal Service employees don't look at those signatures. All that stuff goes through automatic machines and that just moves through. But you can put it in one of our ballot drop boxes. That's the most secure process. Because the only people who have access to those drop boxes are myself and our elections team. And all of those ballot drop boxes are secure from the standpoint that they're all keyed. And there is a bar that goes across the key piece on the lower part of that drop box with a seal, a numbered seal that's put on that bar. So if anyone ever breaks that seal and tries to get in, we're going to know it. And those seals are tracked. So we have a log for each one of our ballot drop boxes that actually tracks and verifies each of those seals. So when we go to open the drop boxes, which I did on Tuesday, earlier this week, we do that 3 weeks before Election Day. That's when the ballots are mailed. And so people will begin receiving those ballots about 2 days after that mailing. We open those drop boxes, we put a seal on it, those seals identified. Then when we go to retrieve the ballots from those drop boxes, it's required to have 2 people. So we have, usually it's myself and an individual that we have hired to come with me, so that we have 2 initials, 2 verifications of the seal we break and the seal we put on the drop box. Secondly, we put those in the ballots then go into canvassing bags that have a zipper that then has a bag seal that is put on them. So once those ballots go in that bag for transport back to the courthouse, to our election center, that seal is also tracked on that log. So when that seal is taken off the bag by other elections personnel within the department, then that seal is also verified. So it's a multiple tracking, multiple log, multiple people process to where we are tracking those seals and tracking the ballots in a way to where we can ensure by anyone who wants to verify it or anyone who wants to follow us, which happened last year, to see how we're doing this, we absolutely welcome that. The first time we ever had someone follow us to retrieve ballots from our ballot drop boxes was last year. And I welcomed that because they learned a lot and they watched what we did, and that is a verification process of the public that I believe should be done.
I agree.
We need to have transparency, which is the reason we should have at all elections, which don't always, observers at our elections office within the building. So once we receive those ballots come to the courthouse and they go directly downstairs into the elections room to never be removed. So that is the assurance that we don't have additional ballots being changed, we don't have ballots coming through, we don't have something coming in differently. Everything that comes out of ballot drop boxes and everything that comes from the post office goes directly there. In fact, most of the time what happens is during elections is there's 2 of us that actually go to the post office to retrieve those ballots. Again, 2 people. And then they're brought into the building directly downstairs to the elections room. Once those ballots arrive there, the number of those ballots are counted and put in batches. And those batches then are tracked throughout the whole process from that point. The ballot envelopes with the ballots in them are put into individual boxes, metal boxes, in their batches, and those boxes are sealed until they're reopened then to do any process by which they move through. So the first thing that happens once they get down there, of course, we count everything that's come in so that we have a number that we can track throughout the process. we need to know how many of those ballots are moving through that batch at all times. And actually what's interesting is we count the number of ballots in those batches 20 times through this process to make sure the same number of ballots are moving through the process in each step that we move through. The first process there is the signatures checked. Now that signature has to match what we have on file. And we have that on file in our database that is tracked. So the ballot is put in front of us, and as we wand the barcode on the bottom of that ballot, that signature comes up for an actual person match of that signature. And each of the people who do that, including myself, have gone through State Patrol signature verification training by the people within the State Patrol who that is their profession. So that all has to happen in order for anyone to do signature verifications. Most of the time, those signatures verify. If they don't verify, or if there is no signature on the ballot envelope, then they are set aside and tracked separately, and there is a letter mailed to the voter for either to have them provide us with a signature to be able to match, to have their ballot counted, or to update their signature because it may have changed. And once that comes back through, then it's not the same people who have determined whether or not that is a match or not, or whether or not there's a signature. That goes to the canvassing board for the final decision. And the canvassing board is the final decision makers of whether those ballots are counted. We'll talk about that process here in a moment. But once the signature is verified, then the next step is to remove the ballots in the secrecy sleeve from those outer envelopes. Once that's done, those outer envelopes are set aside, and at that point in time, we have no idea whose ballot that is. After that's done, then the ballots are removed from the secrecy sleeve. Secrecy sleeves are set aside, and then the ballots are unfolded, and we do a process which is called verification or inspection to ensure that the ballots are going to be able to move through the process from that point on. Voters can get creative for what they do on ballots. And there's everything from marks that may go through a barcode, from extraneous marks that may or may not go through choices on the ballots. The instructions on a ballot is if you mark a candidate and change your mind, then you mark it through and you mark the second one. Well, what that does in the system is cause what's called an overvote. But anyway, once inspection's done and there are two people who look at those, then the batches then moves to scanning. Now in the scanner, what can happen is what I just described to you, where a voter changed their mind, or a true overvote may occur where a voter actually marked two different pieces. The system identifies that as an overvote. Now we are a voter intent state. And what that means is that we do the best job we can to determine what the voter's intent was on their ballot. So the system identifies those, and then we are required to make a decision in the computer system to determine what that voter's intent was. Now, those decisions are made also, two people have to be there in order to ensure that, and there's a log of who those people are. But there's also a log of who's logged into the system, and therefore an audit trail of what was done to that particular ballot by that person. So if that ever has to be pulled, we can track that as well. So all the ballots are moved through that process for scanning. And then we do all of this I've just talked about up as soon as the ballots start coming in. So what's very clear here is many times people ask about, well, when do you start counting ballots? Well, we start counting ballots when they come in, but we don't tally the votes. So it have to be a very clear distinction between those two things. We track the number of ballots that move through the process all the way through it so that we can reconcile at the end of the elections process. But we don't tally votes until after 8 o'clock election night. So once 8 o'clock election night comes, there are two different systems. We download the information onto a drive from the system where we have pushed the ballots through and scanning and done that management. And then that's moved over to what we call the tally system. That's when the votes are uploaded, and that's when the tallies of the votes actually occur. Now, what needs to be very clearly understood here is we have three systems in elections. There's the voter registration system, which is connected to the internet very securely and has a whole lot of process to ensure that doesn't get hacked. And I can go in a whole dissertation about how that works. The second piece is the ballot management system, and that's the one we scan the ballots in and do all of the what we call the voter intent piece. That system is not connected to anything. It is standalone. It is not connected to our county intranet, and it is not connected to the internet. So it is very secure. The other system, which is the tally system, is also standalone. It is not, they are not connected to each other, nor is it connected to the intranet or internet as well. So these systems and all of this process is in a room that is very secure, so people don't get to it. Now the room is double secured. You need a key to get in it, to undo a lock, as well as a code to get into the other lock. And there's only 3 people in our county that know that. And our security officers don't get in it, they don't know it, nor does maintenance get in it. The only people who know that are 3 people within the auditor's office and within the elections division of the auditor's office. So the security piece is very well put together, and that's the process with how the ballots move through. So once the tallies run after 8 o'clock on election night, that's when we upload all of that into both our system and the Secretary of State's.
So the actual ballot counting is done, it's through the process so that you know how many ballots you have received, but the tallying of votes does not take place until after 8 o'clock on election day.
That is correct.
Okay. I know that you've mentioned a couple of times a canvassing board.
So the canvassing board is statutorily made up of 3 people by law. It is the county auditor, the county prosecuting attorney, and the chair of the Board of County Commissioners, or their designees depending upon the circumstances. So usually if one of those people is on the ballot, then they designate someone, the auditor and the prosecutor would designate someone within their department to actually be on the canvassing board. If the chair of the Board of County Commissioners is on the ballot, then they would designate one of the other commissioners, because only the commissioners can be on that canvassing board. Now, there are times when, for instance, myself, or I have maintained myself on the canvassing board when I'm on the ballot, but that's only when I don't have an opponent, because generally that's not a conflict of interest piece. However, if there ever came a situation where there was a question regarding a vote for me, I would recuse myself from the vote and the canvassing board for that determination. It takes 2 out of the 3 to make a vote, and I would recuse myself. So those are the kind of processes we work through. The canvassing board is the ultimate decision maker of anything that occurs that is a question within the election process.
I think that clears up an awful lot of the questions that people have had over what a canvassing board is. Throughout this process, we've seen in the news and things like that where a box of ballots will be found and things like that. Doesn't sound like that's something that could happen within our county.
I would say not. Could that happen? Maybe there'd be 1% chance of that happening, but I would venture to say that's not going to happen, because we track this stuff very, very closely. Once those ballots come in, they come into a specific area within the elections room, and we go through all of our bags, all of our boxes, everything periodically throughout the process to ensure that we don't have something there that's a problem. Because the other piece, we have the logs of what's coming in from the ballot draw boxes, and again, we've got the trays of ballots that are coming in from the post office. Those come in the door, and the first thing that happens is those things are opened up and counted so that everything is clear, that everything's emptied, and we know what's in the department, what's in that elections area.
Well, a number of years ago, we had the issue with the governor's race and things like that. What's changed over the past 12 to 16 years to make certain that we don't have news reports that boxes are found in closets again?
So, within the first 2 years of 2005, when that occurred, there were over 1,500 new election laws passed. And election laws continue to be passed to continue to ensure the transparency, to continue to ensure the critical nature of our election process and the security and the accuracy of the process. So, could that happen? Nothing's perfect, but the ability for that to occur has been significantly reduced in the process. Most people talk about the issue within King County. Well, that happened when the elections director reported directly to the county executive, and there was a culture within that particular department that was concerning. And what's interesting is the person who had been hired to try to hopefully change that culture was working on it, but it had become a difficult task. Well, what was interesting is the largest elections jurisdiction within the country hired him away, and he's been there ever since, and that is LA County. But what occurred in King County was they changed their charter to where the elections official now is an independently elected official and reportable directly to the public, not the county executive. So that has been a significant change within King County. Now, there are other counties throughout the state that had some issues, but as we've improved the process and as laws have changed, particularly one of the laws that changed was the Secretary of State's office is now required to come in periodically and actually do a review of our elections process internally to assure that we're following the rules and the laws and the processes, and watches us how we do that. So, and then there's a report filed that's public. So we are all paying very close attention to how this works.
Well, it sounds like within the process, trust is a big part of it.
Absolutely.
And that's both candidates, voters, and within your office.
Absolutely.
So I think that's good for our public to know so that they're paying a little bit more attention in the future.
One of the other things that occurred that changed many years ago, not too long after that governor's race, was there is a requirement that a minimum of 2 individuals within every county auditor's office be a certified election official, which means we have to go through specific training that is put on not only with the Secretary of State's office, but in conjunction with the county auditors and our elections committee internally. And there's mandated number of hours, and then we have to go through 2 federal elections in order to get that certification. And then you have a certain number of hours that of continuing education over a 2-year period in order to maintain that certification. We have 3 in our office, and I am one of them.
Okay.
So that's very important, clearly, to understand that there is a certification process that also got put together for people who work in elections in order to maintain that level of competency within the elections process within the state.
Okay. One of the things you mentioned was that election laws are subject to changing.
Always.
And that comes directly back to our state legislators, correct?
That is correct.
So if there's questions that have to come up, if there's concerns about it from our citizens and things like that, they should be reaching out to our 13th district representatives and expressing those concerns.
Absolutely.
Sounds good. All right, well, that wraps up our voter ballot part. We'll move on to our next question after this short, brief interlude. We're coming into our final section on elections with Jerry Pettit. This will be, we've actually discussed the collection of the ballots And now we're going into reconciling the security issues that are in place or security measures that are in place. So Jerry, explain the process on ballot security. I think you've already gone over some of that, but it might be helpful to go over a little bit more. We know that you've got securities in place for the collection of the ballots. Looks like there's securities in place for the storage of the ballots. Then we go into a process, or it goes into a scanning machine, which is a standalone system from the tally machine.
Yes.
Within each one of those sections, there are additional reconciliations that take place.
Yes. So there's a manual reconciliation that takes place at the end of everything at certification. So certification of election is something that's really important because that's when everything the canvassing board's gone through all of their review of any ballot that may be challenged. Hopefully people have returned letters or come in with signatures or updated signatures, provided signatures. So what happens is, to quickly review, is when ballots begin coming into the office, remember, we've counted the number of ballots that have come in. So we have to balance that at certification.
Big question I've had.
So we need to track every single ballot that's come into the system and into the office, into the courthouse.
And that ties back to the envelopes then too.
That ties back to the number of ballots that have come in. That ties back to the number of voters that we have, that we reconcile to within each precinct, within each district, within each city, within the county. That has to all tie back. So remember, there are times when someone has asked for a replacement ballot because they either didn't get it or misplaced it or something happened to it, or they don't happen to be home at the time that their ballot was mailed and they didn't receive it. So they can actually go online and actually get a replacement ballot that is for their specific place through VoteWa, which is the statewide voter registration system. There are other times where someone will ask us to mail a ballot out to them. So when we are involved in that, we have to track the ballots that are out there. So someone has asked, can there be more ballots out than the number of registered voters?
That's a question I've had.
So the answer is yes. But what you need to realize is we've tracked all those. So we know how many ballots have been sent out. So when there is a replacement ballot sent out from our office, the previous ballot that was sent, there's a way that we track the ballots that's sent out. So that ballot then is placed on either a canceled or a pending situation. So we know whether or not where that ballot is and what's happened to it. So we mail out the second ballot. That one becomes the active ballot, not the first one. Now remember, we're not tracking the ballot itself, we're tracking the envelope that's sent out with the ballot in it. Because we can't track an individual ballot to a person. That's not possible. So it's the actual envelope that's been sent out. So when that comes back, on the return envelope, there's the barcode on the ballot that identifies the person. The ballot doesn't identify the person. Because remember, when we move the ballot from that envelope, we don't know whose ballot it is. So we are tracking those ballots. So when that envelope is actually numbered. So when that comes back, we're going to know which envelope that is. So for instance, we received both of them back. So the first one would come back that was originally mailed out. We'd go, oh, wait a minute, that's been pended. It's not something that we're going to use right now. We're going to set it aside and wait for the second one to come in. So what happens is, if the second one comes in, then the first ballot's canceled. If the second one doesn't come in, then the first one that's sent out that we received, that's the one that we count. So we are tracking this stuff in every way possible to know what's going on. Now, someone can go online and retrieve a replacement ballot and then send it in. But we also know that if someone's already mailed in their first one, we're not going to count that second one because we've already shown that we received the first one. So there's ways for us to track those things constantly. So we know what's going on within the system and for each individual voter within our counties and within the state, actually. So that's how we track that piece. So that's an interesting question, and we always have to be careful on how we answer. So are there potentially more ballots out there than registered voters? Absolutely. But we track where they are, what they are, and what's going on with them.
In a scenario where a replacement ballot was asked for, but the signature didn't match, what would you do?
Then what happens is we have to determine, is that the only ballot that's received? If it is, then we're going to send a letter back out to them because it didn't match the signature. And the same process we do without the replacement ballot. The same processes work every single time as we move through this process. We have to verify that that's the voter who's actually mailing that ballot in. And many times, people don't provide us with a signature if there's no signature on the envelope, or they don't update their signature. Well, what occurs then is that although those also go to the canvassing board, okay, and there are times where the canvassing board believes that a signature that's been questioned is actually fine, and that ballot moves forward to the process. But most of the time, the canvassing board agrees with the person who's originally checked the ballot, the signature. As another piece of that is when a person actually questions a signature in the initial process, they will actually ask for someone else to look at it as well. So there's not just one person that's questioning or challenging that signature, there's two. Even before that goes to the canvassing board for that final decision. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on within the elections process to try to make sure that that ballot is actually that person's ballot.
What happens with an envelope that comes back unsigned?
That's the same process. If there's no signature, we send a letter back out to the voter and ask them to provide us a signature. So that letter's going to the voter for that envelope.
Okay.
And that's the signature that's got to come back to match that voter for that signature. And that's how we verify that. But again, that goes to the canvassing board for a decision.
So that ballot would not be subject to scanning or anything else. It would be pulled separate.
It has to be pulled separate. So any challenge ballot, whether if there's no signature or a challenge signature, those ballots do not go through the process until there is a decision made by the canvassing board as to whether or not to move it through or not.
That's good information. So
now the security pieces of our computers, again, what I talked about is there's 3 systems and 2 of them are standalone. People ask, well, how do you know that? Well, come on in, we'll show you. But and we very much restrict people into our elections room. But we can prove to you that it's not. But now, second of all, people say, well, what about the systems that you purchased? Aren't those vendors, haven't they done things within the system to try to make sure that they can do what they want? Okay, so there's a multiple testing process that those systems go through for the state of Washington in particular anyway, before they can even be used in the state. So first of all, the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission, which is charged for working through these processes for these vendors, the systems that those vendors create are tested by multiple different types of testing agencies that the EAC actually works with for that to ensure that they work according to proper process. Okay. Then, any system that's used in the state of Washington is also tested again and certified by the Secretary of State's office prior to being used. And one of the rules, which very seldom is ever waived, those systems have had to have been used in at least one election in another state somewhere before they're allowed to be used here. So, and in any time there's an update, that has to be, again, go through the same process in order for anything to come through in our system. Now, the other piece of that is, remember, there is a hash number that is identified with every individual program that is used, and anytime there's an update, there's a new hash number. So we have to be able to verify that hash number with what's on record with the Secretary of State's office, so that we haven't done something that isn't been verified and certified with the Secretary of State. And that is done when they come in to do our reviews periodically. So we have to be very careful that we're not doing something. So those are the security pieces that we deal with within our systems and how that process works. Now, one of the things that also is, I am a member of the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission Standards Board. That Standards Board is the group that is a nationwide group that works through standards for elections within the country, that is then pushed forward to the Election Assistance Commission prior to approval and for approval for national elections processes and procedures, and as well as policies. So that Standards Board is a very important board because it is made up of 110 individuals, 2 people from each state and each territory. And the first of all, it's made up of either the statewide elections official for the state or their designee and another appointee of local jurisdiction within that state or territory. And the person of that jurisdiction has to be a different party than the person that's elected at the state level. So what you have is a D and an R from every jurisdiction on that board. So it's an interesting process to how that moves forward, because so it starts at the EAC, Election Assistance Commission, and then moves to testing, moves to the state level until it gets to the local jurisdiction for authority to even purchase something that's certified.
So those are the entities that actually, or that group is the entity that would then set the standards for the legislature to look at and introduce changes that are necessary.
Correct.
Okay. So there's quite a few checks and balances.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. That's interesting. Before we get into citizens' involvement and things like that, let's talk about the certification process.
For elections officials, or for the systems?
Actual, the systems. I guess it's the back in my youth, you would have a number, usually the night of the election, and you knew who the winner was and things. That's been not the case here over the past number of elections, and I know it's because of the vote-in-mail part of it. But explain that to us. How does that go through?
So what we need to be aware of is, on election night, there are still a lot of ballots that are not going to be tallied. Now, there are a lot of things that contribute to that. First of all, somewhere between around 40% of the ballots that we receive on the night before, in the ballot drop boxes the day before Election Day.
So the last few days of the election.
And Election Day, and in the mail on Election Day, and then we don't always pick up the ballots on election night. So please, that's a very clear understanding. What we do is we lock those ballot drop boxes down at 8 o'clock, and then the next morning we go and pick them up. So those ballots haven't been included, as well as the ballots that come in the mail on Wednesday and Thursday. And actually, we can receive valid ballots up until 5 o'clock the day before certification day, as long as they are postmarked on election day or before. So you're not going to have 40%, 30 to 40% of those ballots in that initial tally. And especially on a general election like last year, where there's a presidential election, we get inundated with ballots at the last minute. So even ballots that we've received on Monday before Election Day may not be included in that tally. Because remember, there's a whole process that those ballots have to go through before they get to tally. And every single ballot envelope that comes in has to have that signature verified. It's not a random sample. Every signature is verified before they move through the process to count or to tally the votes. So we're going to have a whole bunch of ballots on hand that we haven't even gotten to verify signature yet. So yeah, those things can change. Now the other piece of that is, remember, we are required to do audits, batch audits, verification processes as we move through this prior to the tally on election night. So each procedure that is required of us, that is added to our process, means that there's fewer ballots that are going to be included in the tally on election night. People will make the assumption of, well, we're going to include everything that's in, you're going to be including. No, it's not like it used to be years ago when we had poll sites and almost every ballot that was in the county was going to come in and we were going to run those through the machine and actually continue to provide additional reports until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Well, at 8 o'clock you had a deadline and that was it.
So now, and not just because of vote by mail, because before we went to vote by mail, 70% of our voters were already absentee voters. And we got those ballots in the mail the day before and election day and after election day. So please know that we do the best we can to get as many ballots as we possibly can in that initial tally on election night, but it's not possible to get them all there because we have this process that we have to go through to ensure the accuracy and the security and the credibility of our election process. This is not a hurry-up process. We have to make sure that everything is accurate and transparent and accountable to ensure that we're moving through this. Otherwise, we're going to have errors, and we're not going to allow that as much as we possibly can.
Okay. It sounds like they keep adding more and more to your task.
Constantly.
And
we keep telling our legislature and our voters that the more you add to what we have to do prior to election night,
the longer it takes.
The longer it's going to take, and the fewer ballots that are going to be included in that tally on election night.
How does you don't actually charge for elections, so how does your budget handle the process of elections?
We charge for elections.
You charge for elections.
We charge the jurisdictions that have either candidates or propositions on the ballot.
Okay.
So the county doesn't pay for all of this.
Okay.
And in fact, now, just starting this year, the state is actually going to pay for their share of elections on even years in which they have most of their candidates. They didn't do that. The counties was responsible for that.
Yeah,
now they're not. But there's an interesting twist to that when that occurred. The state was paying for all of the postage for all elections for the return envelopes.
Mm-hmm.
Now that they're going to be paying their share of even year elections, all the jurisdiction in the county now gets to pay for that. So we're going to be paying for it. It's required, so we're all going to pay for that. And all of our jurisdictions, we bill them for their allocated share of those election costs.
Okay.
So as we track all of that, that's also going to be included. Now, one positive thing that is a positive, I think, but be aware it's costly, is effective this summer as a result of this last legislature. All counties are required to produce a printed and mailed voter pamphlet for every election.
That's at the county level, not at the state level.
That's at the county level.
Okay.
So now in the past, we have never done a local voters pamphlet. We are now required to do that for every election. That includes the February election, the April election, the primary, and the general.
Can that be done online?
The statute says printed and mailed voter pamphlet. Prior to this, we've done an online voter pamphlet, but not all candidates participate.
Yeah.
And not all candidates participated in this printed voter pamphlet either.
I'm aware of that.
And you should be receiving it in the mail here shortly. And not all jurisdictions, not everyone in the county is going to get a voter pamphlet for the primary because not all jurisdictions are on it. So that's a good thing that we're now providing that printed mailed voter pamphlet to the public, but it's expensive. So just remember, not only does the legislature requiring us to do additional procedures and additional processes throughout the process, the cost of elections is going up.
And they're passed on to the local
And they're
level.
passed on to the local level because all the school districts, fire districts, water, sewer districts, all of those districts and the cities, as well as the county, are paying for your allocated share of the cost of those elections. We bill them. The county doesn't take the brunt of that cost.
Wow.
Now, you asked about our elections budget. Yep, it's going up. And we continue to try to manage that the best we can. And we do the best job we possibly can to limit the costs of our elections as much as possible. It's hard at times because we have to maintain that security and accuracy and transparency to assure that everything works well. And yeah, it's costly, but there's a cost benefit to that it is secure and accurate and transparent. And that's what's important when it comes to the elections process. Some people have asked to what cost democracy? Well, there's a cost to democracy, but we have to realize that those costs are generally appropriate to ensure that accuracy, security, and transparency of our elections process.
It's interesting. Within this process, there's an awful lot of trust that's built into it.
Mm-hmm.
And we have got to vet our candidates in a way that you just can't trust them. I wouldn't say that you distrust them, I say verify.
Verify the situation,
Right.
Verify the candidates, talk to your candidates, talk to the public, do your research to the best of you possibly can so that you know who you're electing to these positions.
And again, since there's no qualifications with the exception of a few offices, it's that much more important at that point.
Absolutely.
So, the last question I'd like to cover is citizen involvement.
So we are required by law and to notify the two primary parties, the Democrat and Republican parties, at each election that we are looking for observers. We notify them. It's the party's responsibility to identify who those people are going to be and to provide us with a list. Most of the time that works, not always, and not all time slots are filled, but we've been fortunate the last while to get a number of observers that have actually come in to watch, and that's really what we want. I have no problem explaining to people what we do. I have no problem educating how the process works. I encourage that because it's important so the public really has hopefully a better comfortability with what we do. Observers are not allowed in the election room. That is an absolute secure room. But we have two huge windows for people to sit or stand and watch. We have two concave mirrors inside the room on the opposite wall so that they can see everything that's going on within that room. We don't want to hide anything. We don't want any question that something's occurring that they can't see. And I try to be there periodically to be able to answer questions that the observers may have, to be able to have them know what we're doing. Now, observers are also required to be trained. So what we do is prior to election time, when the observers are going to be coming in, we want to know who those people are so we can let them know, and we usually do 2 time slots, so we invite them in. Actually, then they can come in the elections room then to provide explanation of what we're going to be doing, what to expect, and what we would like them to do to help us ensure transparency of the process. It's required. We don't always get everybody there, so we don't absolutely hold to that, but we want as many people as possible to be able to come watch what we're doing. That's important because that's how we maintain the transparency of the process so that the general public knows what we're doing.
Does our future hold video oversight?
No. There are a few counties who are doing streaming video of the elections room. There are some concerns regarding public disclosure and therefore retainage of those video processes.
Mm-hmm.
We've chosen not to do that because of the major legal concerns of what that may be, as well as I don't really want to have that out there to be. I have a concern of what may occur, of what someone may do within the room that can provide for someone watching that, or to download and copy it and then use it in a way that is inappropriate. So there's a lot of concerns that we have with that. Many people within the public might say, well, you need to do that. I just am not ready to do that, and I'm not going to make that decision just because of so many issues and so many concerns we have and how to manage that.
And I think that's probably prudent, especially for the people that are actually tasked with accounting for everything, the security that's involved and everything else. So,
and we've seen things occur out there that are very doing the best job they can to do these things, and then we've watched individuals cut and paste and do things with those that are absolutely inappropriate, and therefore it creates the issues that we don't need.
It's all in presentation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, my final area that I'd like to cover is citizens wanting to get in touch with you. How's the best way, if they've got questions or anything, to contact you?
We have multiple ways through email.
Okay.
On our website, you can contact us through just the auditor.
The office.
The audit
office
at
clerk.
co.kittitas.wa.us.
Yeah.
We also have an elections email. We have a recording email, a licensing email, a budget and accounting email. We also have my personal email, which is absolutely out there to be able to use. Please use that. Call us. I love phone calls. I like to talk to people.
What's the number?
509-962-7557 is my direct line in my office.
You got it.
Call and talk to any of the individuals within the office. I mean, we have well-educated, well-knowledgeable people that answer questions. If they are uncomfortable with that, they'll send it to me. And I'm absolutely happy to talk to people. Come in and visit.
We have frequently.
Come on in and visit. I mean, I'm happy to sit down in the office to talk to people. Now that we're allowed to do that,
Yes.
I enjoy face-to-face conversation because that provides for even better understanding and education of what we do in our processes.
Sounds good.
It provides for the ability for us to work with people, and please do that.
Well, that's the transparency and the accessibility that
Absolutely.
we're lacking in government anymore.
Transparency and accessibility is extremely important in government, and especially in elections.
Yes.
So,
Well,
welcome it.
I want to thank you for your time.
You're very welcome.
I would welcome everybody that's listening to reach out if you've got questions. Please make them aware, or make us aware of what those are. You can either do that through the Sentinel at centralwashingtonsentinel.com, or you can reach out directly to the auditor's office. I want to thank Mr. Pettit here for taking the time and the effort to actually sit down and go through this. This is something we hope to do more of with other elected offices, with other within the cities and things like that, trying to bring more accessibility and transparency to the citizens of Kittitas County. So I thank you for watching, and enjoy your evening. Thank you.